Good evening, I'm Saraya Mia and you're tuning in to AWANI Tonight. Russia ready to negotiate with Kyiv if its army surrenders. More on that coming up. Russia is ready for talks with Kyiv if its army were to surrender. Russian forces press their advances into Ukraine today as Kyiv prepares for an assault aimed at overthrowing the government. For now, Ukraine's democratically elected government remains intact, but President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Russian forces have entered the city, and he is the #1 target. The US, UK, European Union, Japan, Australia, New Zealand and Taiwan have hit Moscow with fresh sanctions. But Zelensky says the sanctions announced so far were not enough and pleaded for more international help. Putin warned Russian business leaders that he expected further restrictions on the economy, but called for businesses to work in solidarity with the government. Zelensky said over 137 Ukrainians, including civilians, were killed on the first day of the invasion. UN Refugee Agency estimated 100,000 people have fled Ukraine so far. Thousands of people took to the streets around the world to protest Russia's attack on Ukraine. From America to Asia, protesters turned out on public squares and outside Russian embassies, denouncing the invasion, demanding Russia to withdraw its troops.
Australia can do more!
Public buildings and landmarks in the major cities were also illuminated in Ukraine's national colors of blue and yellow to show solidarity. In Russia, hours after Putin ordered his troops into Ukraine, thousands across the country took to the streets to slam his actions. Over 1,700 people were arrested for demonstrating, defying warnings and threats from Moscow. Russians, including journalists, scientists and celebrities, also signed open letters and online petitions decrying the aggression, demanding the Kremlin to stop the assault on Ukraine. In other news, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake struck near the western coast of Indonesia's Sumatra island earlier today. At least 2 people died, while tremors were felt in neighboring Malaysia and Singapore. The earthquake's epicenter was on land and fortunately had no tsunami potential. According to Indonesia's geophysics agency BMKG, the earthquake struck at 9:39 a.m. at a depth of 10 km. In West Pasaman, about 17 km from the epicenter, some 20 people were injured. Meanwhile, Malaysia's meteorological department said the tremors had been felt in Selangor, Perak, Negeri Sembilan, Johor, Putrajaya, Pahang and Kuala Lumpur. Meanwhile, more than 500,000 people have lost their jobs in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover last August. This is an estimate by the International Labour Organization, highlighting the severe economic fallout in the country on the back of COVID-19 and depleting funding from the international community. ILO's Christian Vigilan is here to talk more on the employment crisis faced by Afghanistan.
Looking forward, we expect employment losses to increase to nearly 700,000 by mid-2022, given the economic situation, which makes enterprises struggle and which makes work become scarce. And we also have some optimistic and pessimistic scenarios that we develop. In our pessimistic scenario, we think that employment losses could even increase to more than 900,000 jobs. I mean, these figures, is that a lot, right? Employment losses of 700,000 or 900,000. Well, considering that more than 6 million women and men were in employment in 2020, according to the labor force survey that was conducted in that year, the employment crisis is certainly very severe in Afghanistan.
The situation, he underscored, is more devastating for women and children.
We do indeed see women being impacted more than men. So even before the events of mid-August last year, women's labor force participation was extremely low by global standards as well, so at 17% nationwide. Women used to be in employment mainly in certain sectors like agriculture or manufacturing of textiles and garments, as well as public administration or social services. But these sectors are now severely affected by the ongoing crisis. And at the same time, we do we have seen a limitation of women's economic opportunities by newly imposed restrictions.
More worrying, he said, is that more children are leaving school to work due to severe poverty and food crisis in Afghanistan.
Another group in the population that is undoubtedly affected by this crisis and that I would like to mention here are children. So there are no current estimates on the impact that the current situation will have on the number of children in child labor. Nonetheless, we at the ILO believe that a rise in the number of working children and a decline of children attending school are certainly and unfortunately outcomes that can be expected of that fragile situation that the country is currently in.
More after the break. Welcome back. Former Astro Malaysia Holdings Berhad Group CEO Dato' Rohana Roshan has confirmed that she met the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MACC). She said she has given full cooperation to the MACC in investigations following claims of alleged blackmail of former Goldman Sachs banker Tim Leissner. Testifying this week in the 1MDB-linked corruption trial of former colleague Roger Ng, Leissner claimed that Rohana had threatened to expose his involvement in the multi-billion-dollar scandal after she learned that he was about to end their 10-year relationship. Leissner alleged that he was blackmailed to give Rohana a $10 million or 42 million ringgit home in London or be exposed. Leissner was chief of Goldman's Southeast Asia operation and is testifying in the criminal trial of Ng, the bank's former head of investment banking in Malaysia. He pleaded guilty to money laundering and corruption charges, while Ng has pleaded not guilty to conspiring to commit money laundering and violating anti-corruption law. Malaysia is highly capable in its COVID-19 pandemic response and in managing other crises. Rear Admiral Pamela Miller, Command Surgeon General of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and Chief of the Medical Corps, said the United States consider themselves lucky to have Malaysia as a regional partner.
Malaysia is extremely fortunate to have such a highly trained, extremely talented team of professionals that are trained and ready to assist this country during COVID or any other crisis. I'm very impressed by their capability and capacity and consider ourselves very lucky to have them as a regional partner. And I am extremely impressed at what Malaysia has accomplished in terms of the mitigation efforts that are in place, as well as achieving the highest vaccination rate practically in the entire world. That just shows the strength of your healthcare infrastructure and your team of professionals and the Malaysian Armed Forces' ability to lead and help lead during a time of crisis.
Miller stressed how military is important in managing large-scale logistics and providing medical expertise. She added that the command is working to improve capability to respond to regional requirements. These include expanding areas of mutual interest and partnerships such as drafting doctrines for joint health service support, exchanging subject matter expert, as well as building leaders in the medical professional world. The Indo-PACOM Medical Working Group MWG, with military representatives from both the US and Malaysia, was recently established to enhance and coordinate medical capability building activities in Malaysia. Miller was here on a visit to meet with Malaysian counterparts and shared the United States' desire to continue coordinating and enhancing health partnerships with Malaysia. Malaysia's consumer prices in January rose 2.3% from a year earlier. Although slower than the 2.5% forecast by Reuters, food prices in January hit a 40-year high of 3.6% increase on a year-to-year basis. Carmelo Ferlito from Center for Market Education tells us what to expect.
This means that consumer price still are on the rise, as almost always, I would say, but are rising at a slower pace than expected. And in general, the trend is in a deceleration when compared to the last part of 2021. So at the end of 2021, the annual inflation was at 3.2%. Now has gone down at 2.3%. So prices are still growing, but at a slower pace. Of course, this is the result of different movements within the basket of prices under observation. So we have indeed prices that have slowed down, like transport, that was responsible for the biggest increase in the last part of last year. But what is still probably a source of concern for the average consumer is that food prices are still growing at a faster pace, so 3.6% on an annual base. And this is, I think, the highest in the past 4 years.
We asked Carmelo if monetary policy adjustments are needed now to keep a lid on inflation.
I'm not advocating here for an increase of the interest rate, because it's very dangerous to be done now that we need the economy to grow faster. But I'm advocating for a program of gradual cutting government spending. This is the only way that we have to keep the quantity of money a little bit under control, and therefore to also help prices cooling down.
Commenting on the unfolding crisis in Ukraine, Center for Market Education's Carmelo Ferlito says sanctions on Russian oil and gas would mean higher energy prices globally. And Malaysia will not be spared from the wider impact, even though it is an oil-producing nation.
The beginning of the war in Ukraine, this is going to have an impact on energy prices on global scale. And this is out of doubt going to be expensive for consumers, to put it simply. For the oil price to grow, you know that Malaysia obviously is an oil producer, so it's good for fiscal revenues, but at the end, energy is becoming more expensive for consumers, both private and industrial consumers. So in general, the war can bring an upward pressures on prices.
As political parties gear for the Johor state election, several seats stand to witness intense battle between opposition parties. At least 46 out of 56 seats will see major federal opposition parties going head-to-head.
The most controversial one being the Larkin seat, which sees not only Muda and PKR contesting, but Pejuang as well. Here is a table showing how many of the seats that will see overlaps between the opposition parties. With the political landscape fragmented, any split in votes make it hard to predict which way these battles will go. Nomination day for the Johor state election is scheduled for tomorrow, while polling day is set on March 12.
Public disenchantment and political instability are the byproducts of party hopping. Can legislation help? Tonight on Consider This, we speak to our guests about the upcoming anti-hopping bill. That's all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news updates on astroawani.com, or you can also download the Astro AWANI app. I'm Saraya Mia. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.